Good hi. I'm Jay, and this is the year of the Killjoys. And no, not that TV series that keeps coming up when I'm looking for references. I'm sure it's a fine show, but stop it! So most of us go through a bit of an MCR phase in our lives, and some of us never really leave, but I wasn't really exposed to their music until late 2017, well past my regular emo phase. I was pretty obsessed, but more from a musical perspective than a particularly emo one. I admired the creativity that went into each of their albums, the concepts and themes they played with. So when I came to the sudden end of their discography, when I'd listened to Hesitant Alien and all the B-sides and all their spiritual successors, I got my hands on the Killjoys comic book. It was gripping, engaging, weird, and all hells of fast pace. I idly wondered if all his comic books were like this. And by idly, I mean I ran out and bought the first volume of Umbrella Academy. Between school, trying to learn 10 different skill sets, hammering out scripts, and editing, I watch things about 3 times slower than my peers. So I'm writing this having just finished watching the Netflix adaptation of that comic volume, and I'm positively blown away. No, this isn't my grand transition to YouTube critic, I'd be abysmal at that, but oh my god, I love it so much. Is it a perfect show? No, it's got its flaws here and there, to be sure. Is it even a great show? Maybe, but even I don't think it stands quite on par with the shows I label great. What I think it is a truly great adaptation. Applied to a story in general, great operates on one metric: how good it is. And as we know, merit's a simple thing to distill, and once you've determined it on a scale of 1 to 10, that rating becomes objective truth. Great as applied to an adaptation is also measured by how good it is in general, but it has something else to worry about. Staying true to the source material, trying to tell, in essence, a version of the same story. How to Train Your Dragon is a great example of a good movie that's just a meh adaptation. Maybe it ends on the same messages as the books it's based on, but the way it gets there bears no resemblance to the series of events, consistency of character, or tone of the books. They're both good, they're just not the same story. Then again, both Percy Jackson movies are terrible movies and terrible adaptations, so you can't have that. The original Umbrella Academy comics are swift, sweet, and sweird. MIT likes to brag that getting your education there is like drinking from a fire hose, and I think it's apt to say that getting your superhero story from Umbrella Academy is like getting your brooding emo music from, My Chemical Romance. As Gerard Way would describe it, it's essentially a postmodern take on the likes of X-Men or Doom Patrol, during a time when that wasn't the norm. It was a year before the Irredeemable comics, and 2 years before the Watchmen movie. Part of its efficiency is the familiarity everyone who reads comics has with those archetypes. Their origin story is told in the first 3 pages, specifically because it's the part that everyone focuses on. We're familiar with the archetypes already. Big do-gooder guy. Token sexy girl of the team. Tragically dead teammate. Wolverine-ish dickhead. It doesn't even take time to explain Pogo and Mom and the cut character Abijat? 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 Because we should pick up on it. So it focuses mainly on things that differentiate the team from the rest of superhero fiction in general. Their horrible upbringing at the hands of Reginald Hargreaves and their deep misunderstanding of what a family should be. It results in the comic being ludicrously short. I don't know if the layman's understanding is that the comics explain all this more, but they really don't. Even with all these shortcuts packing as much story as possible, I was more than skeptical when I heard that they were gonna try to stretch this into a 10-hour, 10-episode adaptation. The original comic is 150 pages long. Take a moment to think about what that means. Each hour-long episode of the show gets 15 pages of comic book. That's hardly a storyboard. So the fact that this was a halfway decent show speaks multitudes in its own right. The fact that it's a good show and I really liked it? Okay, I'm putting the spoiler tag here. Go watch the show if you haven't already. I can't really talk about adapting the show without talking about the entire show, so bye! I'll be seeing you in 10 hours. Everyone else, let's get going! A good adaptation in this case needs to do more than just accurately portray the events of the comic, since that exact story is just a bit too short and has some major limitations. For example, and I was serious about this spoiler tag, Vanya is the main antagonist in both versions. But comic Vanya's all white violined up by the end of Volume 4, a little past the halfway point. You can't exactly have her rampaging around for 3.5 hours of showtime. That'd be like stretching the final battle into the space of a whole movie. But our characters still need conflict and confrontation until then. This story just needs to be longer, and what a good adaptation should do is use that length as an opportunity to make the story better. To do this, it has 3 options. It could fold in other parts of the comics to pack a little more punch in there, It could adjust the pacing and exposit more naturally, or it could spend more time on the characters and their individual issues rather than treat them as a unit the whole time. Or it could pack in a bunch of filler with a beach episode, the resurgence of a long-dead foe that Spaceboy and Pogo have to defeat and has no bearing on the main plot. No? Okay, well the show does the first 3 at least.
Number 1.
Take from other parts of the comics. Apocalypse Suite isn't the only arc the Umbrella Academy comics have covered. There are 2 more volumes of content to swipe from if the need arises. Like Temps Aeternalis, a time-traveling organization whose only appearance in Apocalypse Suite is when 5 kills a bunch of them in a donut shop. Basically, this allows for the bare bones of the sequel volume, Dallas, to exist parallel to Apocalypse Suite by making these 2 conflicts the same one. In Dallas, the Temps and the Academy fight over 5 because the Temps want to recruit him, and then fight over the assassination of JFK. At some point, 5 has a standoff with himself, Klaus takes Diego and Luther with him to Nam, etc. So much untapped potential. The showrunners figured out that UA doesn't have to be fighting over this apocalypse here, they can be fighting over this apocalypse here. Stroke of genius. If we skim through the show here, the first episode is entirely Apocalypse Suite based, but the second episode is... This is Suite, this is Dallas, Suite, now Dallas, etc. The original story here is so freaking wild, and not in a way that would probably work for TV. Let me give you an example from page goddamn 5. Okay, so here's the sitch. You know the Eiffel Tower? Yeah, it's secretly a super mech, and the UA kids have to stop it. Now, Klaus tries to talk to a dead engineer. Luther decks it in the face. Diego says some smart-ass shit, and while this is happening, Vanya and the Monocle are watching from a spaceship, where we establish he's a piece of shit to her, and also passingly mention that 5 has run away from home, which is the only time he's mentioned before he appears out of the time stream. And while it's efficient, it's memory-taxingly so. If I had watched the show first, I think I would say that it's still pretty efficient and natural when it comes to expositing the 5 situation. We see his picture above the mantelpiece. Vanya talks to Pogo about it, and by the time he shows up, we don't have to catch the audience up through dialogue at light speed, so we can focus on the new stuff he's saying. Now there, isn't that nice and comprehensible for you? I'll quit it, you should have seen the other guy. But this slowdown is twofold, because there's also just the nature of this world. It's so batshit insane that the rule is don't question it from the beginning. UA is constantly having mummies, national monuments, and aliens thrown at it from page 1. All of which are 1-bit pieces of the game. They don't come back, they don't hint at anything greater, it's just a thing that they have to blow up right now. To the point where, you know, if the world was a little more understandable, it wouldn't actually impact the story all that much. I can actually count the supernatural elements in the show. Let's see. There's powers, Pogo, alien, robot, monkey serum, and time travel. Which, still sounds complicated, and you could probably make a movie out of any one of them. But as long as we keep zombie engineers and space squids to a minimum, should be enough. The characters are similarly toned down power-wise. The Rumor has lie-based reality altering a la Magane from Recreators, while Allison gets simple mind control, which is a little less overpowered. Luther, Ben, 5, and Vanya are pretty true to form, but Diego actually gets a power up, going from ability to breathe underwater to, throw knife good. Look, at least it's an improvement, which, can't say the same for Klaus. Which brings us to the final option. Sorry.
Number 3.
Expansion. The show can take hours expanding things that the comic establishes in a single frame. It uses what the comic sets up and adds a human element with the extra time. They get to be more than 1-bit characters in a way that only 5 really gets in the comics. In real life, you don't get someone to betray their family and end the world by, asking them twice. So the conductor gets expanded. His seduction and corruption of Vanya is a slow, creeping process. Emphasis on the creeping, because since Rumor is such a horrible person who uses her power to get whatever she wants, we'll up that inner conflict by fast-forwarding Allison in her arc, so that she's the person who's trying not to be Rumor. As a result, I ended up liking her a lot more. Spaceboy and Kraken get a couple frames of bickering about the monocle, and that does establish what we're supposed to think of their relationship throughout the rest of the comic, but Luther's turnaround on Dad happens a lot more gradually. The Kraken is, by and large, just a dick. He's the one who pushes away Vanya, he's cynical about his mom, he's kind of enough of an ass to be entertaining, which is the only reason we tolerate him. He isn't like a bad person, he selflessly defends the innocent and all, but God, he doesn't have to be such a prick about it. Diego, on the other hand, has emotional connections that help us sympathize. He has a daily life, things he's struggling with, a complicated relationship with the law. I was prepared to hate him early on, but by the time he's willing to run back into the house for Grace, I feel it. Is he my second favorite after Klaus? No, wait, okay, there's Hazel. Third. Oh, but speaking of Klaus, let's talk about Klaus. Number 4. While toning down the weirdness and upping the human, I think they made the most interesting choices with him. Instead of the strongest Academy member, capable of stopping meteors with telekinesis, he's largely the weakest, the lookout. The seance is cool, fashionable, friends with ghosts from 100 different time periods. Klaus is a mess, funny as a coping mechanism, and hasn't even begun to reach his full potential. You want to see everything in Apocalypse Suite about the seance's drug problem? Here it is. That's the whole thing. I mean, it's funny, it made me laugh, but that's how it's played. Even when it appears in future volumes, it's like that. By linking the drug use to an understandable trauma regarding his power, the show does my favorite thing ever, using powers as a metaphor and tying them with the character's mental state. Quite worm-like, I approve. Of course he hasn't reached his full potential. Have you seen this guy? He's the only Hargreave that's had to develop social skills because they're important for getting more drugs. He can't just rumor his way through everything, he isn't a vigilante, he's not even the token normal one, and that's part of what makes him so relatable. With that one connection, they've put a new spin on the drugged-out sassy character and the seance. Everything in this show is a development on something the comic barely had time to mention. And the great thing is, it would have been so easy to screw all of this up. So very easy. They could have inconsistently made the characters human. They could have tried to tie in the more incompatible parts of Dallas. They even could have given our characters a chance to develop before whisking it all away for the sake of some dramatic irony. Wait. So the show wasn't perfect. It had flaws. It had parts that annoyed me. Unnecessary bits and pieces. But it stays true to the story of the comics, and makes that story a better version of itself. It turns a wacky postmodern romp into a post-postmodern re-examination of what we can do with powers, and the things we can use superheroes to explore. Family, employment, trauma, age, being a creepy bastard, and the hypothetical results of locking scary people in dark rooms. I'm Jay, and I'm off to start watching The Dragon Prince. In 5-minute intervals, during the rare moments I get to my appointments early, cause I sure as shit don't have any other time for it. I'll see you next week!